Hello, and thank you for listening to the Keto Answers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin, and this week joining me is Aaron Alexander. Aaron is one of these crazy movement people where you look at his Instagram and you think, how the hell is he doing that? And why is he doing that? And this conversation was amazing. We touched on a lot of different stuff. The core, the meat of it is really about how movement affects way more than just your muscle tissues. It's way more than body composition and how it affects all stages of your health. You guys are going to learn so much from this stuff. We hit on keto a little bit, but I think it's important to highlight some of these other pillars of your life. Like, nutrition is important, but movement, stress, and sleep. And we nailed all this stuff and how he uses and has tampered with a ketogenic diet to fuel his movement. So tune in and I hope you enjoy. Before we get to the episode, I wanted to chat about our sponsor, Perfect Keto. Perfect Keto is all about making a ketogenic diet healthy and accessible. Whether you're reading all of our online guides or articles or enjoying Perfect Keto's exogenous ketones or any other keto-friendly products, everything you need to make keto work for you is at perfectketo.com. I know what you're thinking. Hey, aren't you the founder of Perfect Keto? Yep, that's right. And all of my insanely high standards have been put into making each and every product. My background as a functional medicine clinician helps me craft the cleanest and healthiest possible products and best information about a ketogenic diet. Head on over to perfectketo.com to learn anything you need to know about the ketogenic diet. And if you've never tried any of our products before, feel free to use the code KETOPODCAST for 20% off your first order. With that being said, let's get into the show. Okay, movement man. So you're a guy who you post a lot of weird shit on social media, and this is why I like you so much, because I feel like I do nutritionally all the weird stuff. Like, I am the guy who eats weird things at restaurants, who when I'm traveling does really weird things, and people are like, what the hell are you doing? And I feel like you do the same thing with movement, so that's why I wanted to get you on and chat about some of this stuff.
I appreciate that.
So let's just walk me through a typical movement session that you post on the grams.
On the old grams?
Yeah.
So the big thing, so I came from a background being really obsessed with bodybuilding. And so that was, we were mentioning a little bit of background history. Dad got into drugs at a youngish age, went to prison, all sorts of interesting things that I kind of identify with that, making me maybe feel a bit insecure. Doesn't need to be accurate, but it's a part of maybe a potential story with that. So at a young age, I started packing on lots of muscle, and
getting yoked.
I was getting yoked, yeah. So I just really started getting after it at age 15, 16 or so. I think that was a protective mechanism, is what my intentions were with that. And started off as an athlete and started tearing my body down. So I started dislocating my joints, dislocated both my shoulders, dislocated my foot, my ankle.
And was this to be like more macho, or to put out a certain personality type? Like, what?
It had to have been, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Where what was the setting? Was it, where did you grow up and where was it?
Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Amish country. Represent.
Did you grow up in an Amish family? Was it?
No. There's suburb. I grew up in pretty, pseudo normal.
So I didn't know if it was you get super jacked, was building houses and stuff.
I was picking cows up over my shoulder.
Yeah.
So the story, there could have been some other stuff previous to that. It's, I think more often than not, the stories that we tell ourselves are probably just that.
Right.
Inaccurate. But this one would make some sense. And so I just started packing on a lot of defense. And so got into personal training at a young age, started reading as much as I possibly could. And I think that was packing on intellectual defense. So I was packing on muscular defense. I was packing on intellectual defense, just putting all these layers on. And eventually the parts started falling off because I became so darn mechanical. And now, I got into surfing and dance and various different more dynamic movement practices. And now when I go into a gym, it's you can't unsee that really broken linear A to B machine movement.
Right.
Once you kind of go into another place and start to feel connection with your movement, you can't go into a gym and just see people pumping out skull crushers and bicep curls and be like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Break down all of the parts into individual pieces. I have 640 individual muscles that I have to stack and juggle. I'll just break them all down. That'd be great.
Yeah.
It's no, it doesn't work that way.
So that's a huge transition, going from a bodybuilder getting all messed up and overtraining to getting into dance and all this other stuff that created more of a contacted movement and more connection with movement.
Yeah.
What were the things that you had to pull apart to go from a bodybuilder type of lifestyle to where you are at now?
Yeah. Well, I think the big thing is realizing that if you have it just depends what your goals are, honestly.
So did your goals shift?
Yeah. If your goals are bodybuilding, then it would probably make sense for you to do all those bodybuilding traditional movements. Right. But if your goal is to be an athlete, then you need to start doing athletic movements. If your goal is so that's the most important thing. We were kind of talking about this before we started recording. Is you need to define the destination. And then from there you can start to build and put the pieces together for how you actually get there. But most of us, we don't have clarity of where we're trying to go in the first place. Right. So that's the big thing for me is I wanted to surf. I wanted to, compete with jujitsu. That was what I wanted. And so in order to do those things, all the points, they need to fire instantaneously. One of the things that I think is an important kind of meme just to hang on to is we get attached to something like the core. Like, where's the core? Is it, multifidus or transverse abdominis or whatever midsection muscle you want to call it? It's like, no. It's, you can think of core as more of like an event. So if you look at Mike Tyson just like smashing somebody with a hook, it's like, is core doing that? It's like it's that integration through the whole body that's happening. Right. And so creating that electrical stimulus to the whole system. It's kind of nebulous the way I'm describing it, I'm realizing. But
how has your definition of movement changed from the bodybuilding days to now? I mean, I'm sure it's just a different animal altogether.
Yeah, adaptation is the most important thing. I think that this is a relevant conversation around nutrition as well. If we become too dogmatic in any one sense, then maybe all of a sudden we get popped into, from a movement perspective, into a new sport, or great, we're in Costa Rica, we're going to go horseback riding. Right. Do you have the sophistication, the proprioceptive capacity to say, I've never rode a horse, but I think I'll figure it out? If you do explore a wide variety of movement practices, then all of a sudden it increases your capacity for adaptation. To me, that's the highest expression of movement proficiency.
So being able to just do as many things with your body as possible.
Throw me into whatever situation, not me per se, but throw individual into whatever situation. And I have enough, my matrix is sophisticated enough, the web is integrated enough that I can kind of spontaneously create connections there. Yeah. But if you just have one highway of information, as soon as you go off that highway, you're lost. And that's what you'll see with really yoked bodybuilders. Very, very rare to see a yoked bodybuilder be athletic. They exist. Jujimufu is an example of it.
Okay. And so is this why you were all broken at that time too? You mentioned a bunch of joint problems and busting stuff out. Is that because you were just focusing on isolating muscles and building them as big as they go?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Anytime. So I think isolating muscles has value as long as your intention with that isolation is for better integration. So integration, an example of that, like an obvious example of that would be, say, like an Olympic lift, like a snatch, for example. If you can feel that connection of weight, your shoulder, and feel that connect down to the elbow, down to the shoulder, down through the spine, stabilize through the pelvis, all the way to the foot.
So for people who don't know what this movement is, it's basically having a barbell, like a straight bar, and you pick it up from the floor, and then you end in a position where you hold it overhead, very simply.
Yeah. And so that really creates a distinct connection from the foot up to the hand, the highest point to the lowest point.
Right.
So if your intention with those isolated movements is because there is one portion of the body that's lacking, it's disengaged, inhibited, then isolate. You can do that and get in there and start turning on the electricity in that aspect of it. And you should have that vision of what are you doing in the long term. And this comes down to a business analogy, really obviously, as well, or a relationship or anything. Your body is a relationship. It's a relationship of relationships.
So I think that because I'm such a freak about nutrition, that's where I dig in the most. But I'm very, very upfront with the importance of kind of the 4 pillars of health is what I like to think of. So nutrition, sleep, stress, and movement. I can do a very, very good job in a very concise way of telling people, why nutrition is important. Right? Your body's made of the things you eat. Very, very simple. Eat whole food. Like these things that I've distilled over a long period of time. Why? Can you help me communicate to people why movement is a pillar of health and why it's so important in a very simple and concise way?
Yeah. We'll see about the simple and concise, but I'm gonna do my best. So one, example that you could look at, just from going back to more the place where you're so expert with, would be from the nutritional perspective, would be digestion. So we can take all of the, the cleansing pills and do all the, that we're doing the master cleanse and we're doing all these different supplements. But if you don't have that motion happening throughout your intestines and your organs, peristalsis, that undulation moving the food through your intestines, each of the organs have their own subtle motion as well, called motility. So all of them are moving towards the spine and away from the spine, doing this little beautiful spiral motion. If any one of those organs is disengaged from that movement, it can't function. For every function to manifest in your body, it's dependent upon some type of fluid movement. Mm-hmm. And so we can start to help our bodies along with digestion, as an example, to relate to nutrition, through having better gait pattern or better walking. And every time you're walking, you can think of your abdomen. It's kind of literally like you're starting to squeeze this rag. You're spiraling this rag. If you have gunk inside of a rag, how do you get it out? You twist it up and you squeeze the gunk out. So literally every time you take this step and you kind of open up that hip, open up that shoulder, you're squeezing out all the gunk, or, peristalsis, digestion, function happens from that movement.
Yeah, and I think they've done actually a lot of studies that I've seen and read that even your posture while sitting can dictate a lot of your digestion.
Yeah, and hormones.
Yeah, I mean, if you're flexed forward and you're rounding your back, I mean, you're basically just compressing all of your guts, and they can't, if they wanted to move around, even if you have, a parasympathetic response where it is trying to create this peristalsis. I mean, you're not creating any kind of room in your abdomen for that stuff to move around. When you sit nice and tall and upright, I mean, it just makes sense from a space standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Put yourself in a sleeping bag and try to thrash around. It's not going to work. And the same thing with your guts too. Okay, so that's like from an overall connected body wise. What about just from? I mean, what are some things that you notice when you switch from an isolation standpoint to more of a fluid transferable motion standpoint? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure that you got a lot of other benefits that weren't necessarily like, oh, I want to surf. Okay, right. So I'm going to do the things that are necessary for that, or for dancing. What are some of the additional benefits? Was it did you have any joint pain before? Did you have a reduction in that? Like, what were some of the ancillary things that came along as a side effect? Just like eating real food. A lot of times people maybe have a weight loss goal, but then they realize like, oh, acne goes away. Right? Vision gets better. Inflammation reduces. Joint pain feels better. Like, what are the things that you notice as far as movement improved in your life as a kind of a side effect?
Personality.
It's a huge one.
That's kind of a big deal. Yeah, so that's like, you'd mentioned a little bit of like the hunching over position. So there's an Amy Cuddy. She did something. She's out of Harvard. She did a study that probably most of the people listening to this probably be familiar with by now. It's been circulated a lot. Showing that being in that hunched over position ends up causing us to increase various stress hormones. Cortisol is the one they isolated, and decrease testosterone. And then the inverse, when you stand up, they call it the superwoman pose, in that upright position, you end up actually upregulating testosterone and downregulating stress hormones. So you send this, it's been an integrated pattern over millennia that when I hunch over in this position, I roll my shoulders forward, head comes forward, protect my vital organs, aka stare into my cell phone.
Yeah.
That's a position of defense. So if you can start to come out of that, when you look at somebody in a gym, say for example, someone's done like a shrug, doing a shoulder shrug exercise.
Oh yeah, getting jacked.
Got to get jacked, bro. And so you see somebody in that position and they're literally training the startle reflex into their body. They're practicing startle over and over again, thousands of repetitions of I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared. Yes. And, so that pattern's repeated over and over again. We've been getting that for thousands of years, probably millions of years. That means, okay, go into more of a sympathetic type response. Go into a defend your home type response. And that's when you look around the world, depression is becoming the number one leading cause of disability in the world. They said by 2020, I think it's just now. We got to double check. So depression is becoming just a ubiquitous part of being a Western human being. Get some Zoloft, it's fine.
Yeah.
And when you look at that, I know there's a movement conversation there that we're not having. And we are practicing being in a depressed position the highest percentage of the day, and then we end up being addicted to lots of different things to kind of, appease that. But, movement is, your movement is your personality, I think.
And there's been even small things I'm sure most people have heard that if you, for example, smile when you're upset, like it changes your neurochemistry and it changes hormonal expression from that way as well. Like, so if that happens when you're smiling, why would that not happen if you're upright entering a room? Like, why would you not have more confidence if you're projecting yourself in a more upright manner when, for instance, engaging in a social setting, things like that?
Yeah. Paul Ekman is a good guy for people to look into with that. He wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence. And fact check me, I'm pretty sure it's called Emotional Intelligence. Definitely Paul Ekman. But one of the things he gets into is he studied facial expressions for over 40 years. And he said, broke down, essentially there's about over 10,000 different facial expressions that we can make that all have distinct meanings. So we don't just have smile, frown, it's so much bigger than that. And each one of those facial expressions, you could dig in deeper and say, oh, okay, so there's these physiological translation or ties to when I put my face in that position. So the thing you're talking about, there's they call it the pencil study. They just have people hold pencils in their teeth. So they're creating a mechanical smile. They're not happy about anything. Mechanically, you just got to do it to have the pencil in there. And then they find things funnier. All of a sudden the world gets a little bit brighter by putting themselves in that position. The bigger, more interesting question that I have for that is like, okay, cool, that's one extrapolation. What about the other 10,000? So I think that we're practicing those other, certainly over 10,000 different movement patterns that have physiological translations or ties in freaking everything that we're doing. So when you're washing your dishes, brushing your teeth, et cetera, you're kind of sending signals to how well or poorly you're doing.
Yeah, and I think to kind of bring things back to when you were saying before, like we need to have a goal to be able to really make progress in any certain direction. And I think the same thing applies for nutrition. Like if you just randomly approach food at a grocery store and don't have a reason why you're eating it, like you're just going to buy whatever the hell you want. And the same thing I think applies for movement. Like you're talking about before, like someone's going in there and doing shrugs. Well, the question that I have for people that they can't really answer very often is, why are you doing the movement? And I think that there's certain things that crop up, whether it's, running a marathon or just going out and running every day or doing CrossFit or doing this or that, where I ask people a lot of times and they're like, well, should I be doing this? I'm like, well, why are you doing it?
Yeah.
And the answer from that is usually like, oh, well, I thought it was good for you. I thought it was healthy. Or I want to get yoked and jacked. Like, how do you address the overarching why for most people to just like have it impact positively as many things in their life as possible?
Yeah. Are you familiar with a guy called John DeMartini?
No.
By chance? Oh, man, he's good. So he's got a thing called the DeMartini method. He's like on a level of like a Joe Dispenza or folks like that, kind of, manifesting your reality and all that. But one of the things that he gets into there is figuring out what your highest values are. And so many of us, we end up having so much wasted. Right now, Anthony's in a lunge, and we're out in the sun. So we're sipping on some tea and some water out of a glass bottle. Sparkling water, no big deal. We're getting sun on our skin. I'm in like a pseudo lotus position thing, and Anthony's in a lunge. Just saying. It's a big deal. It's an important thing. We're having this conversation. It's like, I think it's really ironic when you go to health conferences and you go to all these different things where we're talking about health. Meanwhile, we're in these broken, busted positions.
Yeah.
And there's better ways to do it.
I remember
that's not an answer.
This is obviously a tangent, but last year I was at this, it was like a paleo-ish conference where people like, Rob Wolf and Chris Kresser and some of these leading experts were speaking on ancestral diets. And then we went out for lunch into the main hall, and it was like just a bunch of sandwiches and like pasta salad.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's quite ironic. Like this is what we have for nutrition and a nutrition conference.
Yeah.
The same thing like with movement and things like that. Anything with health, it's like, okay, treat our bodies.
Yeah, enough
like
talking about it. Just be it.
Sitting in rooms with no light, the dust that form our bodies in really weird positions, and then think like acting like that's health. I don't know. Anyway, tangent. Let's get back to the why behind movement.
So one of the things I recommend to with working with anybody, say working with a client, is I think John DeMartini does a good job with this, but breaking down, I'm going to stand up with you, breaking down what your highest values are. And a lot of times we have inconsistency with what our actual actions are and with what we think our values are. So he's got a really beautiful list of I think it's 13 questions. And each one's an individual question, essentially asking, like, what do you think about the most? What is your vision? What do you want to create? What makes you happiest? At what point of the day? So first, I think defining what it is that really feeds you, makes you feel good. And yeah, just asking questions like, sometimes we don't ask ourselves those questions because we're operating off of the past. We're operating off of what we think we're supposed to do. I think I'm supposed to be jacked.
Right.
Really? Why?
Exactly.
Why do you think you're supposed to be jacked? Is that really what you care about the most? I think sometimes it's like the quality of life is based off of the quality of questions that you ask. Mm-hmm. We just don't ask ourselves insightful enough questions. So if you start surrounding with people like you, like I'm just getting to spend the last hour and a half or 2 hours with you, I feel like a better human being. That might sound cheesy, but like I'm like a sponge with that. I'm like, Anthony comes in the room, I'm like, okay, soften the sponge up, like
it's just
try and grab some of that.
It's the Forest Sigmatic you're drinking.
It's probably the mushrooms.
It's the mushrooms.
It's probably the mushrooms. But I think that's such an important thing. I'm being super tangential right now. I apologize if that's obnoxious, but I think there's so many conversations with this movement thing. And one of the big things is recognizing the people that you are surrounding yourself with. Are they your heroes in some capacity? Is there something that's like, yeah, he's really funny. I love his humor. He has this outlook that's amazing. He moves beautifully. And from there we can start to have some type of modeling, to use like a NLP type term.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the right models in your life, you probably need to sort that out, because that will start to present the better questions.
Yeah. One of the things that I always tell people is like the best movement that you do is or exercise that you get is the stuff that you like to do. Mm-hmm. Right? Because then you're going to do it more. But unless you ask why you're doing the movement and you really figure out your motivations behind it, you're not going to really enjoy any of it. And so the answer can be, I want to move so that I can dance, or so I can participate in social settings. Or it's I want to be strong so I can perform, or I want to compete, or I want to play with my kids, or I want to not be injured, or I want to have longevity. And I think once you have that as a fundamental layer behind things, then you can start stacking things back up and creating a framework that's just effortless for you.
Yeah.
So that way you don't have to make a decision every time like, oh, I'm going to the gym to do this thing because X, Y, or Z. Or like if you don't have purpose or meaning behind it with most of your actions in life, I just feel like you get lost or get distracted or get demotivated really, really quickly.
Yeah, and giving yourself digestible bits. Both of us are working on a book right now. You're further along on yours. And in that's always, there's a squirrel at our feet right now. He's a very curious squirrel. I think maybe if as a younger version of myself, I think he has rabies. I grew up in fear of everything.
He looks very catchable.
He's rabid. He's too close. But so making things digestible, I think, is really important as well. So even, podcasts are such a really beautiful thing because it gives people the opportunity to have just relaxed, organic conversation infused with stuff they're looking for.
Right.
As opposed to being like, okay, I got this 400-page encyclopedia on ketosis. It's like, no, we can kind of drop it in there. And I think I've had a similar go with like meditation, where I was like, I got all hot and bothered about doing these 45-minute meditations. I'm like, this is great. Like this, if you're not doing at least 45 minutes, you haven't even gotten started, which I still kind of agree with that actually. But with that, it's just not so sustainable.
Right.
So every time I start to resent the meditation, it's like, oh yeah, I know it's going to make me a better person, but 45 minutes sitting on the cushion, but if I do 15 minutes, or 20 minutes on a regular basis, that starts to aggregate and I have real change.
Yeah.
I think it's just really important. You can start to instill that into on a momentary basis, throw a pull-up bar in your hallway. So instead of you have to go to the gym and do your pull-up regimen that you hate, just have a hang every time you walk through the doorway. You can do this, start sitting on the floor when you eat your lunch. No big deal. That's a lotus position-ish.
Right.
You put your hamstring stretch. Start changing that mold that you live in, and then all of a sudden you don't have to work as hard. Life shouldn't be as hard as I think most of us make it. I'm talking to myself.
So these are good examples, and I was wondering if you have any more of like how people can change their environment around them so they make better decisions. So an example for nutrition is that I always tell people, just don't have the food you don't want to eat around you. Like, don't buy it at the grocery store and don't have it on the counter. And if you don't have it on the counter, you're not going to see it. Just like you have a couple caps and some other stuff, like some potions and things like this here.
Excessive amounts.
You said, I keep them out so that I use them. So this is an environmental thing, so you actually take action.
Yeah.
You said pull-up bar, things like that. Like, what else could you do to create an environment that fosters better movement?
Yeah. For one thing, have a sunny place to be in. That's huge. So take your office. We're sitting in my office right now. So we're standing on my porch, my little stoop here. And so I have my little chime, so as the wind comes through, that's relaxing. We're surrounded by plants everywhere. The sun's hitting this area. That's the reason it's the office, is because the sun's hitting here, right? So we don't need to go and sunbathe or pay $40 to go to a sun booth or whatever. Just
sun booth.
I don't know. What do they call them?
I don't know. Like a tanning
booth? No. Salon?
Tanning bed?
You know what I'm talking about.
Tanning bed.
How dare you correct me on your podcast?
I was just curious. I didn't know if it was like some new biohacking thing.
I'm your guest.
Bulletproof labs, like the sun booth.
Yeah, the sun booth.
Recreates sun's energy and
infrared light on your testicles. This is going to be going too far, but I take my testicles out while I work. We might have to edit that out. But I'm serious. So I'll take my genitals out as I'm sitting outside, because sun exposure to the testicles, from what I've gathered, tends to upregulate a little bit of testosterone.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Direct sunlight?
That's what I read. A lot of this is, so when I start to get into worlds like that, it's like, regurgitation type mode. So I'm not saying that this is the prophecy or anything. But
hey, whatever works for you, man.
Yeah, I read it, and then I'm like, all right, balls out. We're in.
Okay, so people can create a free genital environment outside, pull-up bar, any other
clothing,
quick wins.
Clothing. Your clothing's a mold, right? So if you're not able to go into a full deep squat at any given moment, you're wearing a straitjacket.
Yeah, interesting. You say that, because I buy all of my pants. Like, that's the test that I have. It's like,
immediately. Me too.
How much can I bend into them? It's like these ones are really, really stretchy. The ones I'm wearing right now. Like, if I don't have that in pants, no
way. Yeah. So I say, when if like folks rip their pants, I'm like, hell yeah, you graduated. Like, you did it. You're expanding. Right. You've graduated out of that old shell. So that's a really big thing. Is your body structurally, your body is always forming. It never turns off. There's never a point where all of a sudden you did your massage therapy or your rolfing or your chiropractic or whatever, and great, I'm set. I was building this structure, the fibroblasts and the fibroclasts, all stuff that I'm sure you're savvy with. Mm-hmm. Our cells are always building and chewing, chewing away the old stuff, building the new stuff. So every moment is information. So you always have this opportunity to start to kind of change the architecture, right? But you got to start having that intention and education.
How about high-heeled shoes for women? I guess for men too, if they want to wear them, but traditionally worn by women. This is one of the things that, especially as a chiropractor, when I was in private practice, just removal of something like that, like you said, pants that you need to do and get in a full squat position, so you have a freedom of movement throughout the day. But I noticed that just a small change of walking more like a human and not having these weird artificial high heels. Like, what have you seen as far as that, and like the detriments to, for instance, like footwear and high heels?
This is really contentious, but have you ever heard there's studies on PubMed around association of schizophrenia with lack of plantar and dorsiflexion, lack of range of motion to the ankle. So that range of motion, just starting to think of the brain as more than just the brain. The brain is your foot and your leg and your viscera. Like, your whole body is the brain in a sense. So if you start to impede a range of motion that naturally, we had they say around 10,000 odd steps per day, change from men to women. If you start to change that movement that we've evolved from suddenly by saying, okay, we're just going to keep your ankle at this whatever degrees your heels are all day long. All of a sudden, that sends a ripple effect through the rest of the body, and it says it ends up impacting the dopaminogenic circuit. So your brain's release of dopamine, or body's release of dopamine, and is tied to various different psychological disorders. Not to mention the structural disorders.
Right. I mean, the structural disorder is like a very easy and clear to associate thing. Like, if your calves hurt and your legs hurt, your knees hurt, and your feet hurt, and your hips hurt, and your low back hurts, and you're wearing things that make you walk all funny.
Yeah. You might feel funny too.
Yeah. So it's like taking those things out as like, people, when they think of movement, and maybe when they see the title of this episode, I don't know what kind of creative tip we're going to throw out there.
Probably
but
balls out.
The balls out.
We call this balls out.
They think of it as intentional exercise. And like you said, like things are always changing. Like your environment molds how you move. Like your intentions mold how you move. Like everything contributes to it. And so I think that there's actually more, like you eat only 2, 3, 5, 10 times a day if you're crazy. And so you have so many choices to make in nutrition, right? Movement is a 24/7 type of situation. When you're sleeping, you're essentially moving because you're setting up an environment and when your body's going to be in a certain position. Yeah. Like this is probably the most next to stress thing that you can think of, like a minute by minute, day by day, week by week basis, that every decision you make is important and adds up.
Mm-hmm. And the other big thing in relation to, other than like the outlandish schizophrenia type conversation, which I think is really interesting, there's probably a lot of relevance there. Not actually just that, but probably lots of things we haven't even shined the scientific flashlight on yet. But is being gentle with ourselves, with transitions. So that's something with like the whole Vivo 5-finger shoe movement. A lot of people started getting plantar fasciitis and ended up like injuring themselves because they went from this overly excessively supported position for 20, 30, however many years, and then boom, I'm liberated. I'm out of the cage. Like, you're not ready to be out of the cage. So if you capture a wolf or a hawk or whatever, my dad was a falconer before he got into the drugs and all that, and take it out of the wild and put it into a cage for X amount of time, all of a sudden it starts to lose its capacity to live in the wild.
Right.
And you're going to have to nurture that, train that to start. Okay, cool. We're going to give you a couple. I got a squirrel. I'm going to let it run out in front of you, and you're going to. I'm talking about a hawk. You're going to go down and get the squirrel. You're going to do it yourself instead of me just feeding you meat all the time. So we need to do that as well with our movement. Right. So with high heels, if you've been a woman that's wearing high heels for the last while, maybe don't just go down into minimalist because you listen to the Balls Out podcast. Maybe start with, instead of having 4-inch heels, go to 3 and then go to 2 and then go to 1.
Yeah, so that's what I was doing a lot of rehab sports, like sports medicine type stuff. We call that graded exposure. So basically we're taking you through, for instance, a movement that maybe you never assimilated in the past. And then, like, for instance, if I was doing more gymnastics work or doing a new lift or something like that, well, my body has a long period of time to adapt to it, and that depends for the activity as well. So, for instance, connective tissue takes 6, 12 months to remodel, a long time. And so sometimes you just literally need a graded exposure to the movement to adapt to it in a proper way. Yeah. You can't just adapt to things overnight. Your body is always changing, but it's not changing everything at once. Like, it's on a cellular level, and then it kind of goes from there.
Yeah, that's kind of what we were getting at that. I think we were talking about like money and things of that nature before, but one of the things that is interesting with gains, like hashtag gains, sometimes you get gains out of nowhere, like structural gains or flexibility gains or whatever, where it's like sometimes what your body really needed was for you to be sick for 4 days. So you would just stop. It's like every day you don't maybe need to be as dogmatically religious about your workout routine. Sometimes it's okay to create a little bit of space, and then your body, your cell at a cellular level can kind of catch up with itself. Sometimes it's not just one-to-one. Okay, I did the thing, now all of a sudden, here's the outcome.
Right.
Sometimes creating enough space and just relaxing. Like, don't be so hard on yourself all the time. And that comes into like relationships. if I'm too overactive with the person, they're like, oh, get away from me.
Right.
I think that we are in relationship with ourselves as well. If you're too obsessed with yourself, if you're too obsessed with your movement or your gains, sometimes I think you're in the way of yourself.
Right.
Having that space to step back and just like, we can just chill and kind of let me happen.
Right. And I think, so one of the things we were talking about money earlier was that essentially, like, if you provide value to other people, it comes as a byproduct because people are willing to give you their value, which is money, right? And so one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is like doing more of the body weight stuff that you do now and like the awesome, crazy movement that you post over Instagram. Like, are you finding, for instance, if you were just to attack body composition and just to do that ruthlessly through maybe bodybuilding or dieting or whatever, how do you notice your body responding just by trying to get as healthy of a movement diet as possible? And then getting that as like a side product. It's like, is your body composition like left over from your bodybuilding days, or do you find benefit from that as a side effect of doing just overall healthy movement?
Are you saying like the present state of my composition?
Correct. Which is,
I don't pay attention to it, to be honest. I do a bit, but that's kind of what I'm alluding to a bit is if you can enjoy your experience. I think there's time and space to do work and like really get in there and work hard, but hopefully you enjoy that, but I personally, no, actually, now that I think about it, I do a little bit. If I notice myself getting a little bit, like I still will see a little insecurities pop up if I get like too skinny. And in those times, I will add a little bit more hypertrophy-esque training. So in those situations, if I want to get a little bit more like swole in quotations,
right,
I would increase the reps a little bit. So from a power training perspective, if we're just thinking nervous system, I want to have more fiery electricity surging through my body to pick up heavier weights fast, then I'll focus more on like low reps.
Okay.
So do like 5x5 or like just 3 reps of heavy-ish weight to me. And yeah, then if you want to kind of turn the dial a little bit different and get a little bit like, I want more definition, I want to go a little bit bigger, then we start looking at more like bodybuilding perspective and go, 8 to 12 repetitions of said thing. And those things for me, I'll kind of combine, this is maybe too much of an explanation, but I'll kind of combine powerlifting, Olympic lifting movements into bodybuilding intentions. So I'll raise the reps, but still be doing deadlifts and overhead lunges and overhead squats and still incorporating calisthenic movement. But the calisthenic movements that I do, I would add that bodybuilding lens on top of it.
Okay. I'm interested to hear your thoughts also on running.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that I saw overuse injuries the most of in my practice, because if you think about it as what your body does with motion and movement, and the way I've always thought about it is that when you run, people think that that's the ultimate exercise from the running fad that's left over from the 70s and 80s. But if you look at it like a door on hinges, right? You're just opening and closing that door within maybe a 1-inch frame from what your body's capable of. So you're never getting full use of your muscles, of your tissues, of your joint surfaces. Yep. And I found that to be a really big problem when people would sit all day and not move their joints at all. They had the door closed and they open it midway and then they just go and wear that down over the course. They're doing that 10,000, 30,000, 50,000 times when they're running mile over mile. Any perspective that you have as far as how running translates to movement?
Yeah.
I think Gray Cook, I think one of his quotes is that, get fit to run, not run to get fit, or something like this.
Sure. Yeah. Another quote he says is adding weight is like pressing save to a Word file, which is just another one since you're mentioning him. That's one that I'll use that one a lot. And with weight, as we're running, just for example, you're adding upwards, I think it's 4 to 5 times your body weight, depending upon how fast you're going. So running is a weighted movement.
Right.
So understanding that firstly, and then beyond that, it's that repetition of movement that's the most deleterious. So holding your cell phone and pressing that thumb over and over again, way more dangerous than fill in the blank thing, capoeira. That repetitiousness, that chronic fatigue, that's the thing that really gets us. And with running, if you're doing like that just death march, that slow, terrible mechanic jog thing for 5 miles every day, and you're just repeating yourself in that really small window of movement, those muscles fatigue. And then that's when you end up really starting to get into injury territory. There was an interesting thing I was reading recently about they were studying Hadza tribes. So they attached GPS units to folks, and they had them just watch. Okay, first let's see how far you're walking or running throughout the day, and I also want to see where you go and how you go. And what you see with that is their movement. It's called levy flight pattern or levy pattern. It's a guy, Paul Levy, who's a mathematician studying various different systems. And what you would see with that is you'd see the way that people move is similar to the way that animals move, the way that sharks move through the ocean. We call it super diffusive movement patterning. So it's that diffusive movement patterning. That's who we are. That's our nature. That starts to feed all of you, all of your cells. It's when we go into that defined single movement, that's when we start to really, we burn ourselves out, and then we have injuries.
Right. So I noticed also that you have, next to all your potions, a level machine, which is to test ketones, and that I've sent you some product before to test it out and to use ketones. Do you think about feeling for movement, or is it just a different goal entirely that why you were kind of playing with that?
So a big thing that I find with being in ketosis, for example, or just like fuel for that, is my big one be cognitive function. Okay. So feeling really clear. But I think that they're one and the same. So if I'm feeling really heavy and just like laden with that sensation of like, I know that the sensation of like eating too much carbs of whatever sort. You just feel heavy, which sometimes can feel kind of comforting if it's like Thanksgiving and you just want to be sleepy and watch football. Yeah. But before doing any type of movement type thing, that's something that I'm going to be definitely paying attention to, is keeping, like, I'll do fine with pretty much any type of really high quality fat, but as soon as I start adding carbohydrates into the mix, I'll have this kind of sleepy, heavy feeling. I avoid it.
What was your first exposure to that, and how did you start peeling that away? As far as like, okay, obviously you've been focused on movement for a long period of time. Has nutrition always been a focus for you as well, as far as like health and overall, wellness?
I'm still honing my nutrition in, to be honest. I think that for me, nutrition is like this ever-evolving thing, and I see so much evolution in these industries that you and I occupy, and the one that I have felt consistently making me feel function the best has been exploring that low carbohydrate, higher fat place. But I really try to keep myself open, to be honest. So the highest importance for me is the quality of the food that's going in. Right. So it's like, it's not what you eat, but what you ate. Right. Kind of idea. So that's, to me, is the thing that's like the number one priority. And then from there, getting into actually what it is important as well.
Yeah. Generally with a lot of these things with health, what I notice is that I hopefully will always be learning and my goals will be changing. So my approach will be differing, but there will be certain constants that I think will hold true. Yeah. And like once you get past that, you have a really good foundation to build whatever you want on. And so for nutrition, I think a big thing would be just choosing whole foods. Like, I don't think I'm ever going to be like, oh, I changed my mind.
It's good again.
The new research came out and you should be really eating shit all the time. Right. Like, okay, I was wrong about that. Let's fix that. Like, there's going to be certain constants like that. With movement, do you think that there's perspective that maybe is a constant versus a changing, like, hot thing where people want to do like smashing mobility work or this or that? Or like, is it like yoga? Like, what are the constants there?
Hip hinging is a constant. So hip hinging, what the heck does that mean? Most of us, we have a tendency of, as we lean over to do anything, we have a tendency of rolling your thoracic spine forward, right? So we end up putting all this stress. My hands on the back of Anthony's back right now, the front of his back. Back of his back would be your chest, I guess, technically, right? I never understood that. So we end up hinging forward with this thoracic spine territory. So we end up putting all that load in these vertebrae that aren't meant to bear load. They're meant to be a distribution into the hips. So if you can keep a good, long, stacked, sturdy spine as you're picking up something heavy-ish or not off of the ground, then you load that weight into the glutes and into the hips, which that's built to bear heaps of weight, depending on who you are, like over 1,000 pounds.
Right.
Right. And so that's going to be a constant. Finding a stack through your body. So neutral spine is a really important term for people to sort out. What the heck is that? Just figuring out a starting point is you could load weight up on your head. For most people, their head is going to be so far forward that they're not ready for that. So like headstands are actually really dangerous for most people. Mm-hmm. You jump into yoga class, headstand, great. It's like, no, so few people are ready for a headstand. Right. It's a really advanced move.
Yeah. So when that head is forward, you're creating this torsional force in the discs in your neck. So I actually had a lot of patients that where they're doing handstand push-ups in CrossFit or, like you said, yoga handstands where they're resting all pressure in their head.
Yeah.
But if it's not in proper alignment, in a stacked position, like you mentioned, to bear that load, if it's in this head forward texting neck position, it's chaos. It's awful.
It's chaos. Yeah. So if you create collapse in any aspect of the body, then you create collapse in every aspect of the body. So our body is this amazing adaptation machine where it can create compensate. You and I right now, as we're standing here, our body's dealing with probably thousands and thousands of bits of information of compensation. We're not perfectly aligned all the time. We're holding, I think it gets a little funny, but, holding emotional patterns. We're holding old injuries. I rolled my ankle when I was whatever. It caused me to have this little medial rotation of the knee or disengagement of the glutes. Maybe a scoliosis manifested from that. And now my body's figured out how to hold that pattern for the last 25 years. So our body is so good at holding all these compensatory patterns. And then the journey, I think, of being in this human body is unraveling those patterns. It makes you feel like more of yourself. I know that's like an out there thing to talk about, but there's something to it.
Buy it. So
$29.99. Unravel your patterns.
So hip hinging is one of the constants.
Neutral spine, hip hinging. Man, so the interesting thing is all of those patterns are tied together, right? So if your feet have a tendency of kind of like pointing out like a duck, and you have more of that pronation type actioning happening, that's going to go swim upriver to the knee, right? Now all of a sudden the knees are dumping inward, so we have medial stress in the knee, that valgus position where it's dropping in. If that position is happening, that's going to be tied to the hip. Now the glutes are disengaged. Your knees are stuck. Your legs are stuck in that medial rotation position. Okay, now the glutes are disengaged. So now I'm not able to create that torque and that strength from the hip when I pick something heavy up. So now I'm just digging myself into a hole every time I pick up my glasses off the floor or do a weight lift.
I think these foundational constants in these disciplines have, to me, come at like aha, like oh duh moments. And I think that for me, it's like eating real food is like, oh, duh, eat stuff that grows. Like very obvious. And I think to me, when that happened with movement was talking about Gray Cook and Mike Boyle and these guys made popular joint by joint approach. Do you know this?
Yeah.
So that to me is like, oh, duh, like look at the anatomy and look what joints are for, and then approach it that way. And so what that says is basically like you said, hip hinging and like what the joint of the hip does. It's meant to move a lot. It's a big ball and socket joint that can move around. And then you look at the lumbar spine, the low back is not meant to create that much motion. Like look at the muscle patterns and look at the joint patterns. It's like that should be a nice stable point where you create mobility on top of that.
Yeah.
And that's just in a back and forth pattern where it's, upper back mobility, shoulder blade stability, shoulder joint mobility, elbow stability just goes in one direction. You can't twist it all around. Wrist mobility, hand stability. And I think that to me was like, oh, okay. This is how the body kind of moves. And like, let's frame everything around that. And like, that makes sense. Using as many of those things as possible and creating these integrated systems, like you said, to translate movement to many different things.
Yeah. And then that's the foundation. And then you should have fun too. So cool. So we've sorted out these fundamental patterns that most people haven't sorted out because the mold that we live in is inherently, it's dysfunctional if you look around. Like any plane seat you ever sat in, terrible. Yeah. Any car seat, bucket seat, terrible.
The car seat is the one that gets me the most. Like,
even with babies, baby car seat. It starts from a young age.
Yeah, like a bucket seat is just molded to like an average American desk worker. Like I have an abmet that I flip around and put in my car when I drive around.
Yeah.
And like that's like, oh, finally, like low back is not just being forced in this really weird position. Like you're right in the fact that like environment dictates a lot of our movement.
Yeah.
it's very interesting to see like that stuff manifest, like what's quote unquote normal manifest and influence people who are like trying really hard. It's like the same thing with nutrition. Like what's normal right now, or it's like, well, high carb, low fat type of stuff is still quote unquote normal. Like it makes it actually difficult to have to be aware of this stuff all the time. But I mean, there's people like you trying to change it with movement and have more awareness around that. Obviously, we're trying to work with making a ketogenic diet way easier and maintainable.
Yeah.
What do you think are other roadblocks that get people in an environment setting?
Well, I'm curious with you, how do you change your food environment?
So I think that a lot of that is kind of like how I mentioned before, is that I just don't have it around.
Yeah.
And so even if I do make healthier choices, like this brand Siete, I don't know if you know these cats, they're in Austin, and they have like cassava flour, almond flour, and coconut flour, like tortilla chips and tortillas.
Yeah.
They're incredible. But if I have something like that around, I'm going to eat the whole bag. Like,
yeah,
I did this.
Right.
I binged like 2 weeks ago. I had some people over in Austin. We had a little dinner. We had a bag or two left over. The next day, I just crushed a giant bag of potato chips.
I do that all the time.
I mean, I guess not potato chips, but like not having that around is the access to it is one thing. And then minimizing decisions. Like we're in Venice right now, Santa Monica area. And when I landed, like, okay, I got an Airbnb instead of a hotel. So that way I can cook my own food. So that way the environment is different. I don't have to eat out as much. As soon as I landed, I went to Erewhon, which is kind of like a Whole Foods type of situation down here. And I bought a bunch of groceries.
Did you get any $30 probiotic yogurt?
I did not. They were all out. They were all fresh out.
Fresh out.
Yeah. And so then just stocking the fridge and not getting a bunch of stuff that I know I shouldn't be eating, like that is a tough task. Like when I'm hungry in a grocery store, I'm like, give me this, give me this, give me this.
Right.
Like I still make really good choices, but to be like, for instance, like recording, I think 10 podcasts this week, like I need to be in a state of ketosis to function at a high mental level for that period of time. Like if I'm eating carbohydrates, like we've been hanging out for a few hours and I haven't eaten, like I would need to eat to stay focused and stay mentally sharp, but I'm able to go the whole day. And so like, even though if I eat healthy carbohydrates, like which I do go in and out of a state of ketosis and I do this, I think pulling that back and be like, okay, my goal here is to be mentally sharp and engage in conversations and have a great time with the people I'm around. That ketosis for me right now is the best tool for that. Therefore, I'm going to buy these foods to fit that in my goal. And so this kind of goes back into like, why are you doing all this stuff? Like, like what is the purpose of it? And like, how do you set it up? And so Airbnb, buying my own groceries, not relying on eating out. I mean, eating out comes with a whole host of problems where, you know, food may look healthy or may like look on a menu like it's good for you, but then they use vegetable oils that are super rancid, for example. And so like just controlling as many of those variables and having a set plan of like, okay, I know that a good olive oil, avocados, and like grass-fed meat, sign me up. Like that's all I need now. Like some macadamia nuts, boom, set.
Yeah. And so I think the reason that probably one of the reasons that you and I get along is because you can see that same conversation from a movement perspective or from a nutritional perspective. It's really the same principles. You know, it's all principle based. You know, so if you can figure out that foundation or those foundations, then from there you have the capacity to maybe adapt to maybe one night you guys went out and it was a big celebration and it was a sushi night or something.
Right.
You know, and your body has that, you know, it's like, we have that kind of insulation, that buffer. Like we're healthy enough, you know, we've paid into the bank account enough that you don't eat a grain of rice and all of a sudden you start bleeding out of your eyeballs. You know, like
terrible side effect.
Like orthorexia is a real thing.
Right.
You know, we live inside of a little bubble reality where it's like that's not real. You know, I think start with the trunk, maintain that foundation, and I think. Personally, where I'm at, you're the nutrition expert. I'm so grateful just to get to hear what you're breaking down all this stuff. But the trunk, to me, a good trunk is the low carb and higher fat and kind of moderate protein. I think that feels good. But figure out your trunk.
Right.
You know, get the values, and then from there, I think, you know, take it easy on yourself as well. You know, like you being stressed out about your nutrition, being stressed out about your movement or about whatever. That's inflammatory.
Right.
You know, so we're looking at all these like the end goal with a lot of this stuff is reducing inflammation, you know, and stress, cognitive, emotional stress ends up having an inflammatory response.
Right.
I think it's a balance of all the conversations.
And I think that's where, when you figure your why and you make your motivation very clear, then those decisions become so easy. Like, I want to perform well and have great connections with the people I'm around and be mentally sharp. Okay. Now I can not have to deliberate and be like, whoa, should I do this? Should I do that? Which comes with a whole host of stresses.
Yeah.
I can just essentially be like, okay, this is where I want to be. Now I'm going to do what it takes to get there. And so it makes it very, very clear and less stressful.
Yeah.
But speaking of stress, what do you mentioned meditation and doing crazy 45-minute sessions. What are you doing kind of on a day-to-day basis to reduce the level of stress besides moving well, eating well? Like, what are the practices that you have?
Besides meditation?
Or including meditation, like, what's your meditation look like? When do you do it? What benefits do you notice?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, I have a tendency of excessively dousing myself in information. And to the point, I think having enough self-awareness of knowing when your cup is full and processing and assimilating what you have, instead of always having this existential sensation that I need more, more. Sometimes it's like, dude, you got some stuff. You're good. Like, sit back and kind of simmer on that a little bit. So sometimes I think that we can have the sensation where it's like, okay, I need to read 25 pages every morning of my book. It's like, that's one approach. And maybe another approach is read one quote from Osho or somebody that you value their perspective and really dig into it. So that, I think, is something for me is realizing when I need music, when I need silence, when I need human connection, when I need aloneness connection, internal connection, and just creating enough spaciousness in my life to be open to those different, kind of like those inner whispers that you get of like, turn the podcast off, Aaron. Go for a walk. Don't bring the headphones. Just go for a walk. I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah. Does that translate into sleep? And like, how much sleep you're getting? Do you protect that? Do you have a routine around that to help with everything else?
Yeah. Rob Wolf, he said he protects his sleep at gunpoint, and I'm kind of a dickhead with my sleep too.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Yeah. I'm like that's a big thing. And so I think of it as like landing a plane. So I need that like hour, and I'm a little precious. Like I think I could be a more robust organism. I've because I've had enough insulation in my life, or like you're in my home now, and I have all this random biohack crap, like supplements, and it's like in a sense, I think that almost makes you become weaker. Like you become a finer tuned instrument, but a Lamborghini is not so good at going off road.
Right.
So it's so in that, I think that's, I think there is something to not being so specific with your rituals and all that stuff. And I find that like hour before I go to bed to be really important. So I will do a little meditation. I'll do a little journal thing. I'll do, generally I'm not going to eat. My lights go off. I'm pretty religious about the light stuff. I'll wear blue blockers. I'm one of the crazy people that if I'm in a place, if I go to a grocery store at 8:30 at night, I don't want those lights hitting my eyes.
Right.
So I block all that stuff. Like I do create a little vessel, a little container for the landing gear to come down so I can hit the pillow. If I don't do that, because I've become a precious organism, the tendency will be, it won't be as easy.
Right. So this is one of the things too, that I noticed, that if my sleep, like if I don't guard this kind of wind down routine, I get worse sleep. And if I have worse sleep, the next day is markedly worse than if I had good sleep. And so for me, like friends would be like, yeah, let's go to dinner. I'd be like, great, I booked us a reservation at 5:30. Like, what are you sound like? Are you like super old? Like, what do you can't stay out? Like, I'm like, no. Like, I need to be in bed. Like, I need to be at home at 8, and then the lights go down, and then I have this routine. Then I read at 9. And
you have your priorities,
yeah,
and look at what you've created versus what a lot of other people have. So it's just figuring out what your priority is. But some people wouldn't want your life. Some people want to hang out in a hammock and they want to surf and they want to eat cookies at 10 p.m. and they like that's what they want.
Right.
It's like I respect that.
Yeah.
As long as it's to each his own. As long as you're like you genuinely feel like fulfilled, and you're not reaching out to other people to kind of you're not taking away from other people because you're messing up in your own process. Go for it and enjoy. Don't destroy the environment while you're at it. But I think there's just so many different approaches at this life. but define your goals, clarity of vision. John, seems like we need to wrap up. But John DeMartini, who I already mentioned, he said, paraphrasing something along the lines of, your energy is based off of your clarity of vision. So if you have clear vision for what it is, exactly what it is that you want to create, it might change. It might not. It's okay if that's not what manifests. But when you have that clarity, then you go. You feel good.
Right.
And then then nutrition plugs into that. Movement plugs into that. Relationships plug into that.
It's so much easier, right?
Yeah.
Great chat, man. Where can people find you?
Well,
where can they find the weird movement videos that I've been speaking so highly of?
Yeah, it's all just ab selfies. It's just me in my bathroom doing ab selfies on the social.
That's actually not weird. That's very normal. So that's why I appreciate your weirdness.
No, I don't think I've done any of those yet. More, they're coming though. Yeah,
when your book comes out, it's part of the launch plan.
They're in the pipeline. The website's alignedtherapy.com. On there, if people have any interest in exploring some of these movement fundamental things we're talking about, the first thing you'll see is a 5-day movement challenge where we start breaking down all these fundamentals that we're talking about and how to implement that into your life. The Aligned podcast. So I'll release my conversation or our conversation on at the same date as this. So whenever that goes out. So if people want to hear more about, because you got some really stunning information, man. I was like, I was trying to soak it up. So that's over there.
Again, it was all made up.
It was all.
It's good storytelling, though.
So people can jump over there, and then everything's Aligned podcast. So all the social media is Aligned podcast.
Perfect.
That's it.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, but even if you didn't, I would love a review. Just go over to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and pop in a review so we can get found by more people, get better guests, and have the information that you need. So please go to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcast, and leave us a review. And if you're new to keto, head on over to perfectketo.com/podcast and enter your email for all our top tips and guides on getting started with the ketogenic diet. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.